All right, cool. Hey everyone, I'm Kathy Ewan with Phase One Design. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live show, Going Custom. This is a show where we talk about everything to do with custom homes and more. So today we're super excited. We are doing a special episode with regards to Calgary's blanket rezoning. And I have here with me today my very smart colleague, Colin Shawalter. Hey Colin, how's it going?
Yeah, thanks. Good. And this is obviously a hot topic. So
I know, the hottest topic of the year. It's a good way
to day talking about this sometimes, and we might as well just support it.
Totally. Yeah, might as well. So yeah, before we get started, just want to say hello to all of our viewers. If you have any questions during the show, feel free to drop it in our chat. If you're too shy to do that, feel free to just reach out to Colin or I afterwards directly. We always love hearing from you guys. So today, like I mentioned, we are going to talk about the future of blanket rezoning. Woo. So I guess maybe we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but we're going to start off with just, framing the question. So first of all, what exactly is blanket rezoning? For those of you who are not really up to speed on that. So I guess to start off with, what happened in August 2024,
Kathy, why don't we even just back up and say what is zoning in general, right?
Yeah,
because
sure,
I think one of the things we're going to talk about today, we're giving high level discussion, right? Because really what zoning is it's your land use bylaw, and by the name itself, it's a legal document with a lot of verbiage in it. So we're not going to get that detailed obviously today, but the bylaw specifically, it outlines what you're allowed to or not allowed to do on your property. Is really the general gist of it. So yeah, and then Kathy, can you get us an update on August 6th? There was definitely some changes to the bylaws.
Yes, there definitely was. So what happened in August was most residential lots in the city of Calgary were rezoned to a zoning called RCG. So what that means is that call it a standard residential lot, you can still do things like a house, like a semi-detached, which is, the side-by-side duplex, among other things, secondary suites, all that. But in August, the RCG zoning essentially means that you can also now, in addition to all of those, do also a townhouse or row house style building, and at the discretion of the community. So townhouse, row house style, there's lots of different terminology that's thrown around out there, but I think if you live in Calgary, a lot of people just call them like the fourplexes, or there's lots of different terminology, but essentially it's a multi-family building.
Yeah, exactly. And when we look at the good and the bad and some of the myths and that kind of stuff in the zone, Kathy, as far as like the good things that we're trying to do, or that developers and everyone, and I guess the city's intention by the bylaw modification in general is that we're trying to increase housing supply, right?
Totally.
And what it does is it allows for just a variety of options on these properties, right? So
it really does, yeah.
We used to see communities, right, that were just strictly single family wartime bungalows, right? And what you're seeing now is just a variety of different options within the land use bylaw. So.
Absolutely. And I know, and like, let's just kind of address the elephant in the room. This is like a super controversial topic in the city of Calgary. I'm of the opinion there's always like the good side and bad side, there's always two sides to the coin. So like you said, Colin, it definitely creates a variety of housing options. I will also say though, we are literally in the middle of this, and not just us, but every design firm out there, anybody who is in this industry, the home builders, the planners, all of us. And I will say, I would say that it can be used in not a good way. And what I mean by that is, when you design, let's just say a row house style building or a townhouse style building like that, to that level of density, the reality is your building is going to be bigger than the little tiny house that was there, the wartime bungalow, the 1950s bungalows we see all over.
Yeah.
And you have an option. And we as designers, we have two options. Either, design it like with zero thought of the community. Or on the flip side, there's lots of really beautiful, intentional ways that you can design these buildings that are beautiful and do still fit into the community.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, just I guess side note on economics, right? Is that the goal is that you increase supply of something, bringing
Totally.
down the cost, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, putting in more houses, ideally brings down the cost. I mean, I think one of the challenges in Calgary specifically is that we sort of live in that microeconomic bubble that the demand is growing so fast that the supply just never seems to be able to catch up. The best case scenario, it stabilizes, right? So,
Yeah.
in Calgary, it's a unique scenario for sure.
Absolutely. I also do want to say too, just kind of back to like the design comment I made earlier. I know like we actually just recently had a design that we did, and it was actually on a 50 by 120 lot, corner lot. And in a inner city Calgary community, this community already has a lot of single family homes in them, like usually quite large. Our client hired us to actually do a fourplex design. And the design that we did, we actually, designed it in a way that it very much felt like a single family home. And it was really interesting because one of the exercises that we went through in design was to do a shadow study. And here's what we did. So we took our client's lot, and we said, let's just say theoretically, if we were to put a single family home on it, with a detached garage, like how somebody would probably design a house on that lot. So single family house, what type of shadowing does that cast? So we did a shadow study. And then we actually put a fourplex building on it, and we did that exact same study. And surprisingly, even for me, I was like, oh, I was very surprised when I saw like the shadow impact was actually very similar. So which tells me, it can be done in a responsible way. Now, again, on the flip side, if you don't do it in a responsible way, like we've seen examples of that where it's just like the monster house, or building that size a little single family. Maybe now is a good segue to talk about, the myths out there.
I think that is a good segue. It is one of the myths, this monstrosity of a huge building is going to be built on this property next to me and that kind of stuff, right? Well, what you touched on there, Kathy, is that like within the land use bylaws, whether it's RCG or not, there's criteria that you have to meet, right? Yeah. So you're going to have a height restriction, fourplex or singleplex, or what I mean, or duplex, whatever it is, right? You have the same height restrictions. You have setback requirements. You have all those type of things, regardless of what you're building. So it doesn't necessarily allow them to. Some people will call it like the Wild West. It's not. Yeah. It's not necessarily the truth, right? It's not just going to be the Wild West. The thing we talked about earlier is that everyone just thinks that there's going to be a fourplex on every single lot in the city now because of this new zoning. And I mean it's just not true, and for a variety of different reasons that the media typically doesn't talk about, because the initial thing was to get the blanket rezoning done, and they're looking at the specifics of what that could do, not what it is meant to do or likely will do. So
yeah, and you're absolutely right, Colin. Like, so yes, technically RCG means that you can put a row house townhouse on it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is actually going to be what's happened. That's actually what's going to happen on that specific lot. One of the things that, I guess a couple things. First and foremost, even let's just say if somebody were to actually apply to do that type of building, there is still a discretionary review process that takes place not only within the city, but there's a community consultation process that actually happens where the community associations and the neighbors, they can all provide their comments on that particular development. So really at the end of the day, just because it's zoned RCG, it does not mean whatsoever that there's any guarantee of that approval. You still need to go through all of that. And there's also other policies. We're not going to deep dive into it today, but local area plans, LAPs, are on a lot of the communities out there in Calgary, which this policy layers on top of the zoning. And it is also a document that needs to be followed and is followed as a policy document. So that also dictates whether or not the city will look at that development and say, yes, it's allowed, or no, it's not allowed, despite the RCG zoning.
I mean, really, the simplest way that you could explain it is that the city, instead of identifying properties RC1, RC2, and RCG, they just said, we're good with this stuff.
Yeah.
And now they're passing that, discretionary aspect down to the communities and to the local area plans to decide specifically what they want on those properties. The city now is just basically removing themselves from the specifics is really what it is. Right?
And speeding up timeframes, there's a lot of benefits to that. But yeah, 100%. Like there are, just talking about another myth, you mentioned the Wild West earlier, Colin, and I think that's like such a great way to say it. So no, it is not the Wild West. Fourplexes out there. I will say, our firm has been engaged by a lot of different clients to do these types of projects. And, I will say the development permit process is not just like one and done. Like when we any application that goes in for a fourplex or a multifamily building like that, there's tons of considerations that the city actually does. So even like as an example, when you apply for something like this, usually you're seeing at least 2 to 3 different review cycles through the city, and not just one person. It goes through several different departments within the city. So, like infrastructure, urban forestry, planning, like there's NMAX, there's a whole bunch of eyes that go onto the development and provide their comments from like their different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, Kathy, is it's important because I think all of us, no matter if they're building a single family or a fourplex next to you, you want to understand that, like, okay, we're obviously, increasing density. There's going to be more parking requirements and those kind of things. So it's nice peace of mind to know that those get distributed through multiple different departments in the city and get reviews, right? I mean, we've all seen these comments come back from the city of all kinds of different stuff, depending on how far the buildings are from fire hydrants or whatever it is, right? So there's a lot of different considerations that go in. And I know a lot of the concerns from people were, the infrastructure stuff as well, right?
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think that the concern is that you add more people to these communities and you add bigger buildings that are higher requirements for servicing, that's going to have a strain on the systems and stuff. And I think that to some degree that is probably true, but people are moving here regardless. We got to put them somewhere, so what I think that we need to understand is that once you start building multifamily, there becomes multiple layers of professional involvement on these, right? So again, it's not Wild West. These go through civil engineers, so they have to review the storms, storm drainages and those type of things, right? So the city infrastructure may not be able to handle it, but what typically happens is that the developer is now required to pay money into a levy that the city then uses that money to upgrade the infrastructure. So really what happens is that as the infrastructure ages, these funds are becoming available to upgrade them because of the development that's happening in these areas, right? So in some ways, it's a positive to the infrastructure.
It is, yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of civil upgrades that happen at the developer's cost as well. Like in addition to the stormwater, like sidewalk repairs and trees.
Maybe new light posts and that sort of stuff, right?
Exactly. So So I guess let's maybe shift to that's a little bit about the background of and where we're kind of at with the current blanket rezoning, but maybe let's talk about what does the future look like. So nobody can predict the future, obviously, but
yeah, I mean, we can only work with what we have right now, right? And as of right now, for a lot of our single family clients that are doing these beautiful custom homes and stuff, nothing really changes, right? There's a little bit of some stricter rules in the RCG than there was on RC1, which now will affect some single families. Things like building heights and setbacks and that. There's some, minor details that are different. The single families are now permitted to have a secondary suite and or a backyard garage suite or lane house or carriage house or whatever the terminology you prefer. So.
Yeah, for sure. And the duplex, though, nothing really changes, right? Like we can just, more or less the rules remain the same. So if you're looking at, and sorry, when I say duplex, I mean a semi-detached, like a side-by-side. Nothing really changes. You can add a secondary suite, which I think is great. Again, that's like a really easy way to add density without, going into the multifamily. And it reduces the complexity of the project as well when you do that type of building.
Yeah. And then the other thing that changed was that they have now those properties all have the ability to have townhouse or row house style buildings at the discretion of a community, right? So those type of builds, like we mentioned previously, are going to have a bunch of different oversight from the community and the city from what single families would have. The discretion side of it means that it's going to take quite a bit longer timelines to get permits than what you do with singles and duplex or semi-Ds for sure.
Yeah.
Because there's more eyeballs on it, right? So
there is, yeah, and I think too. I mean, we regularly communicate with the city, our friends there, like on a daily basis, right? So it's really interesting just to see the shift of like what happened after the blanket rezoning. So before the blanket rezoning, yes, like everybody's really familiar with the current bylaw and how it operates and the approval processes, all of that. And so, the timelines were pretty consistent in terms of like knowing what the timeframes are going to be. Yeah, exactly. Not necessarily faster, but more predictable. However, with the blanket rezoning, there was a huge volume of applications that came in as a result. And, I know a lot of people always poo-poo on the city, but because of timeframes and things like that. But the reality is, the city on their end, and I think just the industry as a whole, there is now this huge volume of this new type of building that, everyone's still trying to kind of figure out like, okay, well, what are the things, the nuances and the details that maybe were not considered when the blanket rezoning happened. So now, like through the approval process, as a permit is getting approved, people are trying to figure it out, and we're asking questions. And our team has, as an example, identified like, okay, the bylaw says this on this page, but then over here it says something else, and they conflict with each other. So which one is the right interpretation?
Exactly.
Things like that, right? So you're right, Colin. I think like just the longer timeframes for development permits. So that's an expectation we're trying to set with our clients right now, like as a design firm.
Yeah, and I think that that creates a problem that is going to need a solution, right? Is that the DP times continue to get longer and longer and longer. They're going to have to find ways to remove some of the red tape, and like again, we started at the beginning of trying to increase housing supply. So if you increase housing supply by increasing permit timelines, it's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? A little bit. So, and then, I mean, we always want to look at the leading indicators too from other examples, right? If I know, Kathy, you spend a lot of time on Vancouver. I mean, what Vancouver and Toronto have gone through over the last 10 years, 15 years is what Calgary is going to experience. We're 10 years behind is kind of what someone told me recently. So.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, like, I mean, in the context of, what is the future of blanket rezoning, and this is going to probably sound very controversial, but I don't think this is I think this is just the beginning of what we're going to see. I don't think that this is something that's going to, really slow down in a sense. Cause you look at markets, let's use Vancouver as an example. Cause we do have an office out there, and we've operated out there for, almost 10 years now. And if you look at that market, I mean, all these conversations we're having with regards to like row house style buildings and like density, and even like the amount of units that's on a standard residential lot, it's way higher than what Calgary is. And there, it's really interesting because it was welcomed by the communities, right? I mean, obviously, like not straight across the board 100% of people, but Burnaby just experienced a recent blanket rezoning, and I know overall it was like very well accepted by the community because it definitely created much needed housing. So yeah,
cool. I know you want to touch base on it a little bit too. Recently there was a judicial review of this blanket rezoning, and it's still basically under review. So I mean, maybe touch on that, Kathy. I know you're more involved in that side of things than what I am on a day-to-day, but
for sure. So, on December 11th, 2024, there was a judicial review. There was a group of Calgary citizens that, kind of got together, and there was a gentleman that was kind of championing this initiative. And essentially what they're looking at doing is they're looking at trying to get the blanket rezoning reversed. So that happened on December 11th. The judge's ruling is going to come out mid-January. In talking to other people that have gone through this experience in other municipalities, and other, other people that are kind of like in the know, I guess like there's a few different things that could happen as a result, right? So the first one is like nothing's going to happen. So if the judge just rules, okay, like there's no case here, then or whatever they do there, then nothing will happen, and then just everything just continues to be RCG. So everything we just talked about today just kind of stays in play. The other thing that would happen, like, so let's just say if for some reason the judge did decide to reverse the blanket rezoning, and again, I am just full disclosure, obviously I am not a lawyer, I'm an architectural technologist, but my understanding, and if you look at other examples in other municipalities of policy change, usually what will end up happening is they categorize the applications into different categories based on like where they're at in the process, and then they give deadlines for that. So for example, they'll say something like, okay, all the DP applications that are currently in progress, those ones are going to be treated this way up to this certain date. The ones that have already been approved and maybe not released, those will be treated one way. And then those that are already like in construction, we're going to treat them this way. And then everything else that hasn't been applied for will be treated, which is going to be the majority of the lots, obviously in Calgary, that'll be treated that way. So that's kind of what I'm thinking is going to happen if it's reversed. I have my opinions on, whether or not I personally think that's going to be a successful initiative, which maybe I'll reserve. But yeah, I mean,
I was going to say something that's maybe can be seen as controversial as well, and not as meant to be. But like, really, when people want to know what changed when the blanket rezoning changed, reality is nothing really changed, because there was already a mechanism in place that someone could take a property and rezone it to RCG and do something, and that was always based on their local area plans or discretion of council, right? So now they've just kind of like accelerated some of that. So like, we talked about we're not going to see a fourplex on every single thing. The local area plans identify the busy streets in this community where they're going to remove those old wartime bungalows and they're going to put density there. I think that most people can kind of agree that that's logical, right? And so that already was in place. There was already local area plans in a lot of the communities and already identified which lots specifically they wanted to densify, right? So now all the city really is doing is they're saying, yeah, check those out, right? So, to calm the fears of everybody that is in the world of single families, and they're scared that they're going to have, it's just not going to happen. There's discretion. There's just way too many things that are other factors that still, govern that sort of stuff, right? So, and then for the developer side of things, well, they were already able to do townhouses and those kind of things on RCG lots that were in, local area plans or that had been rezoned and approved by council. So, it's not really any different, if you really want my honest opinion.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. And I guess maybe just to kind of like, because bylaw is very complicated. So before the blanket rezoning, you're right, Colin, it was pretty much the exact same process as after the blanket rezoning. It is now just, it could potentially be shorter. So before the blanket rezoning, if you wanted to, let's say, build a fourplex on a single family lot, you still have that option. But what you needed to do is do the rezoning, which is a discretionary process. So what that means is like the communities would be consulted. And then once that's done, that would be step one. And then step two is like, okay, now I need my development permit. And there's ways to accelerate that if you do that as a two-part process. And then after the blanket rezoning, you're basically just cutting out step one. However, what carried over from step one, and now you still have to do that on step two, is the community circulation. So you're totally right, actually. That's actually really interesting.
Like I said, I really looked at it the whole time as politics, where the city is using these big words to do this, and then they change some bylaw language, and ultimately it's the exact same as it was. In a high level view, it's really similar to what it was before. So just to calm some, from fears from both developers that are wanting to build these things and from single families that you don't want to see them, nothing's going to change drastically. So everyone can kind of calm, because it's really similar to what it was as far as the overall approach. They just kind of, like you said, moved a couple things from the back end to the front end, really, or the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess like really at the end of the day, even if they were to do the reversal of the blanket rezoning, it's if you want to build a single family or a duplex or a secondary suite, I think that's actually kind of a benefit to you in a way, because the rules will go back to what they were before, and which were like more relaxed. Well, I don't want to say relaxed, but like they weren't as restrictive. If you want to build a fourplex, you still certainly can, or a townhouse row house style building, you certainly can. And I think the only difference would be that you would add potentially more time to the process. Although, okay, this is really going down the rabbit hole of zoning. Although I will say that if the blanket rezoning were actually to get reversed, interestingly enough, there is actually something in the bylaw, in the old bylaw, that actually got deleted. Nobody talks about this. We're going to talk about this. that got deleted. That will now, if it got reversed, it would be put back into the bylaw. That actually makes it easier to do row house and townhouse style buildings. So it's kind of like you're giving and taking. So I think overall, it's an interesting perspective, right? It's same versus same.
Exactly. They kind of just, you pass the buck to somewhere else, the decision maker, you know what I mean, is the discretion period just moves, is really what it is, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we have a few minutes left. Did we have any questions? Oh, I wasn't looking.
No, I don't think we have questions today. I was going to say too, we should just like housekeeping stuff. This is our last episode before Christmas and for the year. So we have some really cool stuff coming up in the new year. I know some exciting topics and all kinds of different things. So stay tuned. Sure.
I think should we give everyone a sneak peek, Colin? Like, so we're actually going to be starting a travel series as well, where we're actually showcasing some architectural pieces and just like fun,
different
cool
places in the world and whatever. Exactly. And I think we want to just kind of start a conversation, like, we just spent the last half hour talking about what drives design in a lot of ways, right? Is that, we're designing places around what the bylaw tells us we're allowed to do. So it's interesting to me to kind of go to other places in the world and understand what drove this design, why is it that you're in South America and all the buildings look like they're from Germany, So it's kind of interesting to see how architectural influence can have different impacts. I think that's sort of where we're going to deep dive, and it's going to be kind of, it should be interesting, hopefully. So
it's going to be very cool. So spoiler alert, it's going to be in Chile. Amazing.
But we have a bunch of different topics coming up, and we're going to obviously continue to deep dive into architecture and custom design and all these kind of things that we find interesting, and hopefully you guys do too.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, great. Well, I guess I just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. That's a wrap for today. Again, thanks everyone for joining us for this conversation today. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out directly to either Colin, myself, or even just the Phase 1 Design chat there. We always love hearing from our viewers. Thanks, Colin, for joining me today and doing this. These are always super fun. So
awesome. Cool. Well, if anyone has questions about the blanket rezone or any of these specific zoning topics, definitely reach out. We started at the beginning, saying that it's a legal document, so it's pretty technical. Our team is reading these things every day, so it's one of those things where understanding what you're designing is going to be very important and what you can do. And the other thing I just wanted to touch on briefly too is that I know that it's contentious kind of developing and densifying inner city Calgary and we love the city we've always had and all that kind of stuff. But as people continue to move here and the city continues to grow, like you have a couple options, right? You can sprawl and use greenfield land, or we can, look in-house and start to use some of the land we have to kind of densify. And I would love to see even, things like strategies where we can look at, some of the bare land we have in these cities that's, being held and not being built on, or, I look at things like, say, a single one level shopping malls like Westbrook Mall or something. And I'm thinking, why doesn't that have density on top of it, and surface parking and all these kind of things. So I think in general, there's strategies that we as a society can look at to start to address these things and to avoid all the other concerns that we have, so.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Greenfield versus inner city. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, amazing. Right. Well, Merry Christmas, everyone. we will see you guys. We're going to reconvene next year in the new year. So have a great holiday and see you again soon. Bye for now.
Bye.